In those days, Britain was a big country, but for whatever the reason, the scold's bridles were more popular in the north of England than in the south. In fact, the city of Chester even had to give a helping hand to Walton-on-Thames to help them to punish their women. They sent a scold's bridle to the southerners with the inscription, "Chester presents Walton with a bridle to curb women's tongues which talk too idle."
But southern men had their own ideas on how to keep women in their place, and so they invented the ducking stool. This was a contraption designed to lower a scold into a river and cool her temper. The first ducking stool was built in Cologne, Wiltshire in 1401, and the practice quickly caught on. Female humiliation and DIY, an irresistible combination for medieval man.
Incredibly, the ducking stool was used right up to the 19th century. In fact, the last ever official ducking took place right here in Leominster in 1817. That's less than 200 years ago. While Beethoven is composing his Ninth Symphony, folks in Leominster are dishing out medieval punishments to unruly women. So, Eric, this is the original ducking stool.
Yes.
How did this thing work?
Well, the lady would be loaded into the chair and then lifted up right into the air as far as it would go.
With this beam here?
With the beam here, with it just pivoted in the middle.
Right.
Like a seesaw.
Yes.
And then she'd be wheeled around the town.
Tell me, what sort of women used to get punished by this machine?
Well, they were defined as shrews, scolds and brawling women.
Brawling women?
Yes.
OK.
But I always think of them as the neighbours from hell. And one of the brawling women, we actually have a first-hand account of her ducking.
All right.
And that was a lady called Jenny Pipes.
Jenny Pipes, the brawling woman?
Yes. And apparently when she came out of the water and was released from the chair, the first words she uttered was swearing at the magistrates for condemning her to such an indignity.
So the brawling woman is put in the machine and she goes down under the water and she comes out brawling. What a fantastic piece of equipment. It's so useless.
Yeah.
The very last person to be sentenced as a scold in Britain was a lady called Sarah Leek, here in Leominster in Herefordshire.
Sarah was taken to the town square and strapped tightly into the ducking stool. She must have been terrified. A crowd of locals taunting her, spitting in her face, beating her with sticks. She's hoisted high up into the air and paraded through the town with all the other women laughing at her as she passes. And they reach the riverbank and the sentence is announced. And herein the ducking stool, the woman is to sit and to be let down into the water 3 or 4 times overhead and ears so that no part of her can be above the water. Sarah sits precariously far out over the bank, waiting for the moment when she plunges backwards into the cold river and the icy water envelops her face and fills her lungs. Except that they didn't duck her, really. Well, at all, really, because the river was too low. There was about 6 inches of water there, apparently. So everyone just kind of stood around silently, feeling a bit stupid, and wandered off, feeling like complete idiots. So, Sarah Leek was lucky-ish, but for hundreds of years, many women had pretty violent lives. Violent and crap. They had almost no rights, little or no sympathy from their menfolk, and if they did speak up for themselves, then they were dunked repeatedly into a river until they shut up. And then they probably got beaten up by their husbands when they got home, just for good measure.
And things didn't get any better in Victorian times either. Behind the closed doors of respectable Victorian homes, women of all classes were beaten and brutalised, and worse. Before 1870, a woman couldn't divorce her husband for reasons of violence. Didn't the law protect women? Well, no. You see, when a Victorian woman got married, everything she owned became her new husband's property. And this meant that if an offence was committed against her, only he could prosecute. And if he'd just beaten her up, he wasn't very likely to do that, was he? It was only at the beginning of the 20th century that women started to seriously campaign for equal rights. And then it took nearly 20 years of protests, marches and hunger strikes by the suffragettes before they finally won the vote in 1918. But even after this, attitudes within the home had hardly changed at all.
50 years ago, there was no collection of information about domestic violence. Most women didn't talk about what was it they were experiencing.
Yeah.
If people did know about it, it was sort of accepted and tolerated. What happened, you know, after the war was that we had a series of social changes which created an opportunity for women to get out of abusive situations.
Yeah.
So by the 1960s, by the 1970s, we'd seen, you know, the introduction of the welfare state system, family allowances, changes in divorce law, so a whole raft of things, coupled with the rise of the women's liberation movement, which started to say, you know, look at women's position economically, socially, politically, and start to try and do something about it.
British domestic violence hasn't completely gone away, but at least being abusive in the home isn't acceptable anymore. It's no longer something women have to just put up with.
The problem with violence is that when it's used as a tool of social order, it affects everyone. There's a ripple effect with violence which leaves no one untouched, particularly the most vulnerable.